here I am in Portugal, just finishing up a nice 2 weeks in the country. And in fact, I'm in Porto right now, sipping on sort of a late evening espresso, sort of Portuguese style. And I'm excited to walk you through what I've learned over the last few weeks. So we're going to be exploring what really defines a solid Portuguese coffee, and then also how that has inspired maybe the surge of specialty coffee across the country. So I was actually invited by the AICC, the Association of Industrialization and Commercialization of Coffee, which is quite a mouthful in English, but trust me, it sounds better in Portuguese. We really dove into the traditional style of coffee here. So these are some of my findings. Let's get right into it. So here it is. Portuguese coffee is a drink obtained from an espresso machine, a blend of roasted coffee on average. It's a volume of maybe 35 milliliters with a dense hazelnut colored crema on the very top, and sometimes a blend of different origins and a velvety, smooth texture and fresh tasting aftertaste. So that's kind of how they describe it. I translated it into English and kind of put it in my own words. But that being said, I would love to hear from you. What is your ideal coffee? Your favorite coffee? How does that taste? How can you describe it in words? Leave it down in the comments. They wanted to emphasize the diversity, almost the biodiversity of where their coffees are coming from. So a diverse sense of origin, the origin countries. And to be honest, these, I don't drink a lot of blends on my day-to-day basis. Blends can be awesome, but typically I'm drinking maybe single origin. In this trip, I've noticed some of the most diverse coffee origins that I've seen in blends. Of course, they have the typical, the Colombia, the Brazil, as you might imagine, with the Portuguese connection with Brazil, Ethiopia in there, but I have seen some from India and also Angola. So Angola is an interesting one because I did not know that Angola produced coffee. Turns out that they do, but it's mostly Robusta. And in fact, I have a single origin Angola Robusta right here. This is a bag of coffee that was given to me, so thank you, Portela. And it's not specialty grade. I have been drinking it. It's a Robusta, and it is from Angola. But that being said, I am super curious to find out more about the coffee growing situation in Angola. So maybe there's a trip in the works down to Angola, but it makes sense again with that connection. It was colonized by the Portuguese back in the day, but they still have a very strong connection with Angola. But let's go back to Lisbon, where I started my research. So I started the research on a very in-depth cafe tour. This was a historic cafe tour. We wanted to dive into the traditional side of coffee, and it was led by a coffee expert, historic cafe expert called Vitor Marques, and he actually has his own cafe called Santa Cruz Cafe, but it's based in Coimbra. So Coimbra is a city in between Lisbon and Porto. It's on the way. I didn't get a chance to visit this time, but it's apparently worth the visit. And he has a beautiful cafe and an old church there, which it happens to be right beside where one of the Portuguese kings is buried. So if you're interested in that kind of history, definitely check out Coimbra. But Vitor he's a fountain of knowledge when it comes to the historic cafes in Lisbon. So we started at this one called Café Martinho da Arcada, or do Arcada. I'm not fluent in Portuguese, but it was a very, very cool cafe. And in fact, they have like 240 years this year. So it started in 1782, and it has been serving coffee ever since. Now they do a little bit more restaurant, some lunch, but what's interesting about this space is there is a table dedicated to where Fernando Pessoa, who is a very well-esteemed Portuguese poet back in the day, not too long ago, it wasn't 240 years ago, but they have a table dedicated to him. So they really embraced sort of the arts, the creativity, and people, bringing that scholarliness to the coffee scene, to the coffee houses. And this cafe, Martinho, is actually located in the corner of one of the main plazas in Lisbon. So if you've ever been to Lisbon, that main plaza on the water, it's right in the corner. Go check it out. So that was our first stop. Again, it was 1782. That's super old. We walked down the street. We kind of walked up what I call La Rambla, of Lisbon. So it's sort of really beautiful tile street. And we ended up at the corner there at the top at a place called Confeitaria or Confeitaria. I'm not, again, Portuguese. It's called Confeitaria Nacional. And they were more specialized in sort of like the pastries, and of course they had food and coffee there too. Kind of took a look around, and it was beautiful space, right? So that one is very old too, founded in 1829. So, you know, a little bit younger, but still quite old. We made our way across the street, a little bit further on across the plaza, and we found Nicola Café. So that one is equally as old, almost as old as Martino, 235 years old. So these are ancient cafes, so to speak. Also was a second home to many artists and creatives who came through Lisbon or who lived in Lisbon, politicians, writers, and so really a creative hub, as cafes are today. Of course, now they serve more food, and it's more of a restaurant. Of course, they can get a lot more people in there. It serves historic value. Beautiful old paintings on the wall. But of course, we had a coffee there from Nicola, and it was nice. It was delicious. So at this point, as you can imagine, we're two coffees in. I already had one at home earlier in the day, so we're almost coffeeed out, at least for now. So we decided to mix it up, throw some alcohol in there with the local sour cherry liqueur. This is called ginja, or sometimes called ginginha, and it tastes kind of, as you would imagine, sort of a sour cherry, sweet, alcoholic, and we had it in tiny little wine glasses. It was really nice. I like the ginja. There's all these different brands that make it, but that mixed it up, and then we made our way to another cafe called A Brasileira, which in my personal opinion was my favorite on the tour. Just looks so beautiful from the inside. You know, also very historic. I think this one is a youngster on the block, 117 years old. But we had some port while we were there. So you can't come to Portugal without trying some port. But this one I really liked. Some of the ports that I've had are a little bit on the sweeter side. It's not absolutely my favorite, but this one was really nice. So if you go, try the port or the port and tonic, which is the new trendy thing. But of course they have coffee there too. Great little spot. And then next up, we actually took a little drive up to a place called Pasteleria Versaille. And this pasteleria, same as in Spanish, it's kind of like, it means pastries, but they had everything. Of course, they had lunch, they had wines, and so I had a nice fish lunch with some local wine and some veggies, and then of course finished it up with another coffee from Versailles. So that was that one. Actually, it's the youngest, it's the baby of the group. It's gonna turn 100 years old this year. And so they're very excited for that, as you can imagine. But another great historic cafe to kind of wrap up that cultural, traditional cafe tour. And along the way, we were sipping on espressos roasted by some of the brands, Delta, Nicola, as I mentioned, and Cical. So these are kind of the bigger coffee brands in Portugal. But here I'm sipping on that single origin Angola. And what else can I say? As it turns out, compared to other countries, you know, I live in Spain, there's a lot of café con leches, cortados, of course espressos too, but 80% of the coffee consumed in Portugal apparently is consumed just like this as an espresso. Now, I typically drink it black. I want to taste all the coffee in there. Maybe I like that bitterness, but they will often put a lot of sugar in there. No judgment, that's just what I've seen, that's what I've observed. But a lot of people like espresso, just straight espresso here in Portugal. So later on, we made our way to Lisbon Coffee Fest, and this was eye-opening. I really got a chance to meet some of the people who were behind these more traditional coffee brands, and you know, the marketing directors and the baristas, and it was really cool to kind of see their story. So some of the brands that have what the association calls the Portuguese Coffee seal of approval. So these are Portuguese brands, more traditional brands, such as I mentioned earlier, Delta, but also some other ones, Buondi, Bogani, Portela, Tofa, Torrier, and then there's even another one called Negrita. So this one's quite old as well. It's been around for quite a few years, not hundreds of years like the other ones, but they brewed up for me a siphon. So this siphon, we know it maybe if you've been following specialty coffee or any of the documentaries, or if you've ever been to Japan, you'll know the siphon is very popular in Japan and also in a few quirky specialty coffee corners of the world. But it used to be very, very common way of making coffee here in Portugal. So that's kind of interesting. Of course, now it's switched more to espresso, but that kind of leads me to my next thought. I'm sure some of you are thinking, okay, we've heard about this traditional Portuguese coffee. We've heard about all these blends, some origins that we know, some origins we never tried. Maybe there is a small espresso size, maybe even a single shot sized elephant in the room. Because if you've been watching this channel for any given amount of time, you'll know that I'm almost purely focused on the specialty coffee world, right? We want to explore what is specialty coffee. Coffee that, as a minimum, the source is traceable, the price paid to the farmers is above the commodity price, above the C price, and the quality is above 80 points on the grading scale, right? So we know what we're drinking and we're supporting people along the way. That's what we define as specialty coffee. Now, everything that I just described to you is not necessarily specialty coffee, but I was very excited to see some of these brands starting to branch out into specialty coffee of their own. So this is, at the Lisbon Coffee Festival, got a chance to try a few of their specialty coffee lines, some single origins, and exploring even new ways of brewing coffee, not just the espresso. I like to compare apples to apples, so to speak, right? So we're talking about specialty coffee, but we're also tasting some traditional coffee. And so the coffees that I was drinking were not the most exciting, mind-blowing coffees that I've ever had in the world. They were solid, they were nice, and there's nothing quite like waking up early, going to the bar, standing at the bar, having a little pastel de nata maybe, and having a shot of rich espresso to get the day going. Or maybe like that lunch I mentioned, or after dinner, you got a nice fresh fish, you've got some potatoes, and then you've got some local wine, maybe some vinho verde, and you finish it off with a little caffeinated digestive. That being said, I tend to like this style of, bitter, blended, maybe a little bit of Robusta, maybe a bit of Arabica on some occasions, right? But if we're comparing to specialty coffee, to me, it's a whole different world. It's something that I love and know, and I'm very much a part of. So it's interesting to see these two worlds, how they're interacting, and potentially how they are even inspiring each other. For example, as I mentioned, there was quite a few of these traditional brands really showcasing, the history, showcasing what they've been doing over the years and what their coffee has to offer. On the top floor of the sort of event space, right above the barista competition, congrats to everyone who competed in the Portuguese Barista Championship. But right above there was sort of the Roasters Village by La Marzocco, which hosted the Portuguese specialty coffee roasters from around the country. I think probably most of them were there because that was the place to come together and showcase their new roasts and new origins. So I was very excited to see a handful of them there, and I'm excited to see how they're coming along in the local Portuguese specialty coffee scene. In my experience, this really was the old meets the new, right? The traditional, the tried and true meets the cutting edge of what's going on in the coffee world. But I want to know what you think. What do you think about this whole new approach to coffee? If you've been following along, as I mentioned, you probably know all about specialty coffee. If you got into coffee through more of a traditional coffee drinking culture, wherever you happen to be in the world, do you see a place for both of these? Do you see them feeding off of each other, inspiring each other? Or do you think maybe one is going to succeed over the other and take the market share, take the people by surprise, and continue serving people their delightful caffeinated brown substance? Who knows where it will go? I have my own thoughts, but I do happen to appreciate both, especially after these 2 weeks in Portugal. They have a very strong culture of their coffee, and I've seen quite a few new passionate coffeepreneurs really take things to the next level here. So I'm excited for both. I want to hear from you. what do you think is next for coffee? Leave it down in the comments. It's a broad question, but I know you can handle it. Cheers, coffee nerds. See you in the next... Oh, by the way, I just did a really fun specialty coffee tour here in Porto. So if you're into coffee tourism, come along for the ride. Now is a great time to subscribe. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button. Hit this coffee in your mouth.